Nobody went to school for sales. Each of us has our own journey, a journey that ultimately reveals the two opposing forces: the art versus science, the relationships versus the metrics, selling versus sales. What side are you on? This is the Love Selling, Hate Sales podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Love Selling, Hate Sales. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Mahan, who is a practicing sales professional and also the co-founder of the Practice Lab. Jonathan, thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on with the name of your podcast. I couldn't resist.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. We're excited to kind of jump right in. So before we get too far into the show, tell us a little bit about what the Practice Lab is, and maybe that can get our discussion fired up here.
Yeah. So in a word, what we are is a place for sales professionals to come and practice their selling skills in the same ways that performers, athletes, and musicians practice their skills. Basically, we've recognized that there's a really big gap between intellectually understanding a concept and knowing about a behavior and actually having the skill set needed to pull it off in a real conversation. So we exist to help close that gap through deliberate practice. Again, in the same way that other disciplines close the gap between knowing and executing, which again is also deliberate practice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because, I love the analogy with sports because practice is one of those things. In sales, there's not a ton of opportunities to do it, right? And I think when, even when we were talking a little bit pre-show, that whole idea of even the name of this show, Love Selling, Hate Sales, kind of feeds into that, right? As a seller, at least me personally, I love the relationship side of it. I love the art. I love the art of the deal. I love the people. I love the psychology, like all of those different things. And the only time you really get to do that stuff is live, right? With live bullets, for lack of a better term. And you get so much of the time spent on the hate selling or the hate sales part, which is the management, the CRM, the pipeline meetings, all that kind of stuff. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's probably one of the things that I enjoy most about running the Practice Lab is that's like my one opportunity to really experience the art and craft and beauty of selling, separate from all of the trappings of sales and as a profession, right? Because I've felt this for a long time, and I've known a number of salespeople in my career who very much would resonate with the title of this podcast, right? Where like the actual art of building relationships and managing your emotions and reading other people's emotions and controlling your communication, both your nonverbal and your verbal communication, having tough conversations, right? Like all of this stuff is very difficult stuff to do, and these skills that make you so good at selling are the exact skills you need to excel in all relationships in your life, from family to friends to romantic to everything. So becoming better at them and honing those crafts is just a wonderful, joyful, exhilarating, difficult process.
Right.
And it's one that I love. It's just the actual profession of being a sales rep, right? And again, the management, the meetings, the expectations, the comp plans, the pressure, the short-term thinking, everything that goes into the profession that makes it so nasty is what I don't enjoy about selling.
Well, so you kind of said a lot there, obviously in the vein of love selling, hate sales. So tell me, on the back half of that, you told me the hate part. Is there a better way?
So I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, right? Right now the Practice Lab is still very small. It's just me and the co-founder, and that's probably all it'll be for the next, year or two. But, like anyone starting a company, I have had those thoughts about, if I ran a sales team, right, how would I do it? And what would it be like to work for me? So I've given some thought to this. And of course, I haven't actually had a chance to do it. And I understand that, real world experience would give me some perspective I don't have now.
Sure.
The only thing I've ever done now has been like, first level management and an actual rep. I've never, truly been leading a large team. But I will say the two things that I have noticed about sales cultures across the board, and I've done retail sales, I've done, B2B sales, I've done a fair amount. It seems to be there's this real focus on external motivators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sales management seems to think that's the only way to control and motivate and get the best out of people is through external motivators. And the whole sales profession, from the comp plans to the meetings to everything about it is structured around external incentives. And that's not in alignment with how human beings work, particularly not in alignment with how human beings work when we're involved in more complicated, more nuanced tasks, right? If you're paying people to lay bricks for you, maybe that's the way to do it, external motivators.
Sure.
But with something that is so creativity based, so motivation based, so empathy based, right? External motivators are not the right tool for the job. So that's one piece that seems off to me that I would do differently. I would, create a structure tapping into internal motivators that salespeople have. And the other piece is just the short-term thinking, right? I would say that the way this always comes to light for me is every time I see a new sales manager take over, particularly if you're seeing someone who's being promoted into the management role for the first time, they often very well understand the downside of traditional sales management styles. They've been at the receiving end of it for a long time. And they finally get moved into management. You think to yourself, are they going to do it differently? But what happens almost every time is that they get pressed into that mold and they start acting the same way. And it's because of the pressure they're getting from the top that trickles down to hit numbers and to hit, metrics and to make sure the quarter closes out strong and make sure the year over year is where it needs to be and make sure we're, coming through with our forecast to investors for the quarter. And from the top, there's the short-term thinking, which trickles down. And then you end up with the frontline sales manager who also is sucked into this model of short-term thinking. I'll give you an example here. So one of the jobs I was at, I had a sales rep who was a peer of mine get promoted into management. And in the first 3 months we worked together, I had countless conversations with him about my pipeline, about particular deals. As the end of the quarter came up, we had lots of conversations about, hey, what's going to close this month? And can we get creative? And how do we work with the reseller to make sure it gets it done? Can we do something with a provisional PO to make sure the timestamp says the 31st of the month, right? Tons of conversations about that. We had conversations about my CRM and the notes and the hygiene and about forecasts. My God, did we have conversations about forecasts? However, never once did we have a conversation about what I enjoyed about sales and didn't enjoy about sales, how sales tied into my own personal goals for my life and career, really my why behind why I was doing this. Never a conversation about my goals at the company, right? Do I want to get promoted? Do I want to make a lot of money? Do I want to shift to a different department? No conversations about that. No conversations about my skill set and did I have the right skill set and where was I lacking in the skills that I needed, right? None of that. We didn't have any conversations about anything that truly mattered and maybe could make a long-term impact on my performance. All we talked about was forecast, pipeline, what's closing by end of quarter, repeat quarter after quarter, month after month, because again, it's focused on external incentives and it's focused on short-term thinking. So again, you give me a sales team of my own, let me figure out how I want to run it. Those would be the two things I addressed. Work on more long-term thinking and then work on more of the internal motivators for salespeople.
Yeah. The internal, external motivation thing I find fascinating because it really comes back to what you were talking about in the practice lab, which is aligning the day-to-day practice like a professional athlete would, right? And we actually had your co-founder on the show last week, and we were talking about this thing, right? And my son is now playing baseball with a former Major League Baseball player, right? He's on this little club team. And, before that, I was the dad coach. And dad coach doesn't know anything, but you roll out some balls, you play catch, you do little scrimmages, whatever. Well, it's crazy. The MLB coach, he's got him doing very small, finite things, not at game speed, very deliberate. And it doesn't even look like what you would see in a game. But when it all comes together and it's practiced over and over and over again, all these skills get incorporated into the bigger picture, and he sees that.
No, I think that's huge. I don't know if Jordana may have mentioned it. I haven't listened to the episode yet, but in our cohort, we take an entire 12 weeks to go through the sales cycle. So it's very much like a couple of weeks on this part, a couple of weeks on this part, a couple of weeks on this part. And they are all separate little micro behaviors, moments throughout. But then by the end of it, our sales members are saying, oh my goodness, it's coming together. I just had a call today and I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. And then it looks like a whole sales call. But yeah, very much I'm for zooming in on particular moments, particular skills, and just drilling those skills until they're second nature, right? Rather than practicing the whole thing in one go.
Right, exactly. Well, and that got me thinking about your comment around internal and external motivation. I listened to a guy in local Arizona radio. His name's Ron Wolfley. He's a former NFL football player. And he says over and over and over again, you want the guy on your team who's internally motivated, not externally motivated, not the guy who's only doing it for the next paycheck, who only does it because he hears what the media is saying about him, like all of these types of things. So you've got to have that internal drive to want to put yourself through the torture of professional football. Like that's kind of his thing.
Yeah.
So thinking about that into your comment about sales, the internal motivation, how does a sales leader then tap into someone's internal motivation versus only using those external carrots, right? Is that what you're saying? Is that kind of the role that the sales leader should be doing, is focusing there as opposed to just a commission check or the fear of missing a quota or whatever it may be?
Very much so. So there's a couple thoughts here. First off, there are people out there who very easily tune into their internal motivation. That's the center of their lives and how they live, right? There's other people out there who more extensively tap into external motivation, and that's how they drive themselves. Yeah. I don't know if there's a better and a worse way of doing it, but there are side effects based on which you choose. And with the sales profession being so heavily slated on the commission side of payout, it tends to attract people who are the externally motivated folks. Right. And it tends to only retain people who like that external motivation side of things. Right. And one of the side effects of that is that you have a whole sales force full of people who generally, by and large, are more interested in the dollar and the commission check than anything else. I wouldn't say more interested, but that's a pretty heavy motivator for them, right? Whereas there's some people who would much rather be motivated and tend to live their lives more in alignment with their internal motivation, and they tend to struggle in sales, right? The type of people who maybe they do well, maybe they do poorly, but they typically don't stick in it for life because it's just not healthy for them, and they leave and go somewhere else. Right. So part of the problem stems back to that commission structure. If that was changed, you could have an entirely different sales crew who behave entirely differently. However, even folks who are in sales today, even folks who have learned to live with the external motivation piece, there still is an internal motivation piece that could be there that's not there. So they're kind of firing on 6 cylinders, right? Or on 3 cylinders rather than all 6, I guess. So as far as how to tap into that internal motivation, I think that absolutely should be part of every manager's onboarding process, right? With a new hire, it should definitely be part of the one-on-ones. It should be part of quarterly business reviews, right? And figuring out, why does this matter to you? For some people, maybe they're working for a company that's really mission driven and they also believe in the mission. Right. And they really want to sell more of these software packages because they truly believe every time a company buys the software, the world gets a little bit better. That could be it. Or maybe it ties into their personal goals, right? Maybe somebody wants to be able to live a certain lifestyle or own property or move somewhere or afford to have kids. And this job taps into that, right? Money is a piece of that, of course, but I would still consider that the internal motivation piece. Additionally, human beings are very motivated by mastery and the sense of accomplishment and becoming better at things, right? We love that feeling. And that is completely ignored in sales motivation, completely. No one taps into that and uses that. So I would say if I had reps to work with, right, I would find out what is their why, right? Why does each sale excite them? Is it about their personal life and what the commission means to them? Or is it about the impact they're having on the world, right? And the fact that company bought the software means that those companies' employees will be better off or the customers will be better off, right? So what is that why? How does it tie into their goals and their vision of the world? And then, tap into the mastery piece, right? What do you want to get better at? Like, why would you not sit down with a rep and ask them, what do you want to be a master at? Do you want to be a total Jedi in negotiation? Do you want to be amazing at disarming people and getting them to trust you? Do you want to be a total wizard of like writing compelling outreach that gets people to pay attention, right? Like, what do you want to be good at? Yeah. And then let's set a course of how you become good at that and become a true master at that. That would be as motivating as a freaking spiff, right? Unlike, the most cold emails sent or the most appointments booked or something, Yeah.
Well, I mean,
but
honestly, though, one of the most common phrases on this show is nobody went to school for sales, and even less people went to school for sales management. So if you think about that, and you talked about the pattern, right, of, okay, I'm a rep and now I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to go into leadership. I'm going to do it different. But nobody went to school for this stuff, right? Your manager didn't. They figured it out just kind of by getting thrown into the fire. You're getting figured out by thrown in the fire. And the only blueprint you have to go off of is what you've seen people do before you. So it just gets rinsed and repeated. Whereas what you're describing is what you see, going back to sports, from the best coaches in sports. These people have a framework for the team concept, but they understand that the team is made up of individuals, and they, the very best, know everybody at the individual level and know how to push and pull levers with that individual based on their motivations, right? And that's what a sales culture should be, right? I mean, if you're a sales leader, you got to understand the individuals, because even when you were telling your story about the levers that your boss is trying to pull at the end of a month or an end of a quarter, we heard nothing about you. You said that, but we didn't hear anything about the buyer. What do they care about?
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. What are their motivations? What are they trying to get a promotion? Are they trying to speak at the next conference? Are they trying to, I don't know. I mean, who knows? There's a lot of different things. If you focus on the buyer a little bit more, you could probably add a lot of fuel to the sales fire without discounting or doing weird things.
Oh, I think you could have an entire podcast conversation about how those sales structures that I mentioned, right, of external incentives and short-term thinking affect buyers, and how buyers freaking hate it. And it makes it worse for buyers and harder for buyers and causes more bad experiences. And it's just worse for them. You know, we're mostly talking here about how it's worse for the salespeople, but yeah, it's totally worse for the salespeople and the buyers. And again, I would argue it's not even serving the company either, right? I'll bet you the company would be much better off if they took a longer term view and focused more on internal motivators. And, you know, different companies, different cultures. Some folks would go hard on internal motivators and focus entirely on that. Personally, I've thought to myself, if I had a sales team, I would give people like 90% base, 10% variable, because I really just don't think you need strong money incentives to get the best out of people. But, you know, some cultures, some salespeople, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd be like a 60 base or a 75 base, 25 variable. But I think that both need to be well represented. External motivators do have a place, right? I think anyone knows that there's some time and place to use an external motivator, temporarily, short term, to move a behavior, but then long term to really change cultures and change, you know, organizations and people. You need a healthy dose of internal motivators too. But unfortunately, I don't think our society and economy, right, came from a place of internal motivators. So it's taking a long time to adjust. And I think that short-term thinking piece is just making it take longer in sales. Because if you think about, you know, our economy 200 years ago, 100 years ago, by and large, most jobs involved not so complicated manual physical labor, right?
They were blue collar jobs. They weren't just white collar jobs. Yeah.
For sure, right? Whether it's agriculture or you know, factory, industrial, almost all the workers there don't need creativity or motivation. They don't need, you know, empathy or intuition. They don't need any of that. They just need to put the freaking brick where it goes and screw this and put this, like, it's very physical. And Dan Pink in his book Drive talks about research being done where they have found that for simple, low complexity, low creativity tasks, external motivators actually are the most effective way to raise and increase performance. So you got a bunch of factory workers and you want them to screw in things a little faster or put doors on cars a little faster, tie their compensation to how many doors they put on cars. They'll find a way to do it faster, right? So for 100 years, our whole economy and our ideas around business were based on this idea that external motivators are how you get the best work out of people.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, for the last 50 years, the research has been showing that tasks that do involve a lot of creativity, tasks that are complex, that involve intuition, that involve empathy, that involve advanced brain functioning, external incentives actually do worse than internal, but they also do worse than no incentives at all. Like literally people who are given no incentives at all and just like left with a puzzle in a room do better than those who are given an incentive around it.
Right.
An external incentive, that is. So you got to ask yourself, which is sales today, right? Is sales today that factory worker who's just got to grind through it, even if they're mentally checked out? Or is sales something that involves creativity and intuition and empathy and complexity? I would say it's very much the second. So
yeah, I would say it's the latter. Yeah.
All the research the last 20, 30 years, however long they've been studying this, is pointing one direction. It's saying external motivators do not work in this environment. And in some parts of business, people are starting to catch on, especially more creative-based, right, professions. But sales is not even close to catching on to that trend. And I think part of the reason is because of the short-term focus, right?
Yeah.
If you are a graphic designer and you get the idea that you want to try this new approach of internal motivation on with your team, and you try to sell it to leadership and management, you'll encounter a certain level of hesitation. But I think it's not nearly as much of the hesitation if you're a sales manager who says, hey, I want to try on this new internal motivation thing with my team. It might mean we miss our number this quarter, but I think in the long term, it'll be a good thing. And they'll be like, yeah, miss our number this quarter? Hell no, just do what we've been doing forever, because we got to hit these numbers, because we told the investors 50% growth. And if we don't hit 50% growth, our stock price is going to dip. So let's do this, right? It's that short-term thinking, I think, that's keeping us trapped in the external motivation paradigm rather than retooling it to work more of the internal motivation. Because I think it would be possible that there could be a temporary drop in sales as you retool the process, right? If nothing else, you wouldn't have that crazy, obnoxious end of quarter push that makes a lot of deals come in early. So suddenly that quarter would be 20% lower than you were hoping, right? And even as you have reps more focused on long-term upskilling themselves rather than focusing on making 200 dials, you could even see, for 6 months or a year, there could be a small dip. And again, the short-term nature of sales kind of makes that impossible. So even when a sales manager comes into a role and they don't necessarily like that style of sales management of short-term thinking and external motivators, 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, they just get pushed into that mold where they just have to act that way because that's what senior leadership is pushing down on them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Like you said, the short-term thinking is something that, again, another one of my favorite sayings is I always focus on building a pipeline for life rather than the month, the quarter, the year, whatever, right? And that really is about building relationships. So if you like the art of sales and you like the relationship building part of it, that can be a very strong motivator for you to build your little, pipeline for life, which is your own business, right? And that would be interesting to me, is to think about why people get into sales. Because you think about me, I'm a failed business owner. Sales is a great tool for me to have the upside of owning a business with less risk. Right? So that's how I think about it. This is great. I get to have business conversations, help people think about either how they grow their customers, retain customers, expand wallet share, solve those problems, right? Work with CEOs, CMOs, whatever, to kind of solve these things. And I have the upside potential to make, business owner money. So that's, for me, what feels really good. And I have to assume there's other people like that, right? And there's probably others who have different motivations. I'm sure there are. One of the concepts I've gotten into before on the show is, we always tell people, it doesn't matter how good your marketing is, your sales is, if your product market fit sucks, right?
Yeah,
in a business. Sure. Well, I think it's the same for sellers. You need to find seller market fit. I don't think I could never go sell engineering services. I'm not an engineer. I don't think that way. Right. Yeah. I sell to marketers because I think that way. I'm built into that business. I like it. I can relate to them. I can speak their language, but you put me into a engineering type sale, I wouldn't do. I'd be maybe the worst salesman on the team. Here, I'm the best salesman on the team. There's just different fit scenarios. So to your point about no one's ever asked me why I'm here, what I'm doing. What if you did happen to hire a former customer who's a huge evangelist of your product? They love what it's doing in the market, this and that. Their motivations are going to be so much different than just some rep you picked up from another software company just because, right? So
it's actually interesting you bring that up. That's a much larger factor than I would have anticipated before. For a while, I was kind of the belief that as long as you mastered core fundamental skill sets, you could sell anything, anywhere, any product, any company, any market.
I don't know if I believe that.
There's some truth to that, but I don't know if you could sell it well. You could do it. So for myself, I spent 3 years selling technology to sales and marketing teams. And a lot of the stuff I got to talk about was like the psychology behind why our product works so well. And I really got to teach people and help them understand that I knew the right questions to ask to illuminate to them how big their gap was and how much they needed our tool. And I was a President's Club rep the whole time.
Seems like a great fit for you based on what I know in this short period of time.
Yeah. Pardon me.
Yeah.
I then moved into cybersecurity and really, really struggled because I don't know jack about that industry and it doesn't excite me. I can study and memorize a list of value props. I can listen to customer interviews and make notes on what problems they said they have. And I can bring those things up in a conversation in a smooth and fluid way. But there's just something missing. There's just some spark that's missing. So I actually really struggled when I sold in cybersecurity. I was one of the bottom performing reps instead of being one of the top performing reps. And, after months and months of working with sales coaches and having my managers review call tapes, we couldn't really figure out what was wrong. So we just moved into a different role that was a bit better fit. But I really think it was, like you said, the product to sales rep fit, which is never discussed in my experience, but it does seem like it's important.
I think it's hugely important, right? I mean, people get into sales for so many different reasons. And I do think money is a big one for a lot of folks, but the folks that I've worked with that are the best, right? And they do the big deals, they change their own lives, they change their company's fortunes because they are highly consultative and highly buyer centric, right? Like, yes, the end game is going to be good, but they don't get into the end of quarter discounting game. They're building something that's going to be meaningful that is for everybody, right? Everybody involved. It's a win-win game. I'm going to deliver you impact, buyer, on the other end, but only if you believe it, right? And it's coming up with that type of thing that's only going to make people work that hard for that type of thing.
You talked about buyer centric and even product centric and like understanding the marketplace, and that made me think of something else too. It's massively important for sales reps to be really, really knowledgeable about the industry they serve. I would almost say, you could push back on this, but I would almost say it might be more important that they have tons and tons of knowledge about the industry than even about like the finer details of their product, right? Because sometimes knowing too much about the product makes it harder to sell because then you get pulled into the weeds and you don't focus on the simple things that matter. But a lot of reps, don't know their prospects' world that well, right? Yes. And again, this is me in cybersecurity. Like, dude, this is way over my head. I like barely understand the few points of cybersecurity that directly relate to my product. Everything outside of that, it's a freaking mystery to me, which I didn't think would be that important. But again, after 9 months of struggling, I realized that's one of the differences, right? In the world of marketing, I was speaking their language backward and forward. I learned their industry. I literally learned how to. So Keenan, his book Gap Selling, says this, and I very much agree with it. He says that any sales rep who's worth their salt should be able to, at a moment's notice, quit their sales job and start a consultancy serving their buyer persona because they just know the shit that well that they could be a consultant. And I reached that level at my last job. Yep. I literally couldn't even apply to be an intern in cybersecurity. So back to how to change sales, right? If I could do it better. One of the things I found as well is that onboarding reps are not given a ton of time to onboard.
No.
And additionally, they also aren't paid any commissions until they start selling things, which means even if the company says, take your time with onboarding, this is important stuff to know. If you aren't getting paid half of your income until you start selling, you're not going to F around listening to podcasts and reading articles and becoming an expert. Exactly. You're just going to be like, give me the phone. I got to call somebody. I don't care if I don't know much.
Exactly.
So if I were to do it differently, I'd give every rep 90 days of full OTE, right? You could get paid your commissions as if you were selling. And during that 90 days, all we want you to do is become an expert at knowing the product, knowing the value proposition, knowing the problems it solves, understanding the world of our prospect, speaking their language, knowing their acronyms, knowing what their day-to-day life looks like, right? We want you to be reading audiobooks and podcasts that they're listening to, subscribing to the news streams that they're subscribing to, listening to customer calls that we've had with actual customers, talking about what they like about our product, or even ones about what they don't like about our product, right? Listening to sales calls to understand how the whole sales process goes from beginning to end, objections you're going to hear, like 90 days, just full on student mode, right? Yes, you'll be taking some customer calls throughout to like practice what you're learning, right? Obviously, I'm a big fan of practice, but the purpose of those customer calls in the first 90 days aren't so that you can pay your mortgage, right? Those customer calls are truly about learning and practice and developing your skills. Then after 90 days, then you get, then your rubber hits the road and now you're actually selling and now you got to, sell to get your variable. But I think another change to make, because what I found in my cybersecurity role is that, like many reps, I was in a big hurry to make some sales because I'd been without a job for a couple of months. My bank account was looking slim. Commissions as it are delayed by a number of months. So I was like, dude, I need to start closing things fast.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't spend a ton of time learning about cybersecurity, becoming a cybersecurity expert. I kind of thought I'll get to that later. For now, I just got to close a few things. But of course, you know how it goes, right? Then Q2 comes and now I'm going, oh my goodness, now my ramping quota is higher. So now I need even more pipeline. And I kept putting it off. And now I've been at the company a year and I still don't know jack about cybersecurity.
Right. Well, so think about what we keep telling people. We keep telling people to go have business level conversations with executives. That's how you sell.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that with a script and a list of names. Like, you need to know, one, how to have a business conversation. You need to know the ins and outs of a business. And then in your example of cybersecurity, you better know how cybersecurity companies make money. You better know what levers they pull. You better know that business, that industry, that niche of the world. You better know it inside and out, because if you're expected to have a business level conversation with a cybersecurity executive, they want insights from you. If you can't deliver insights to them, why should they talk to you?
Yeah. And it's impossible to do that if you don't know anything about your industry, or again, if the only thing you know is that very narrow strip that involves your product and what you sell and the problems it solves. Right. Exactly. And I'll say, after a year here, that's literally all I know. Like, I can talk about the problems my product solves. I can ask some educated questions in the exact area that my product fits, but you step 2 feet outside that, I don't know. I sound like a fool. I use the wrong words. I use the wrong acronyms. I ask the wrong questions. Like, I don't even know what to say, once we step outside of that. So again, it comes back to that short-term thinking, right? When I got hired on, my company was like, hey, we got to hit this by the end of quarter, which means all these ramping reps better start performing, which means we got to get them on the phones. And, I ended up spending a whole year before I really found my feet under me, just because the short-term thinking was like, we need to squeeze some revenue out of John right now, rather than giving me 90 days to truly become an expert in the field so that I could, perform at my best.
Yeah. And think about the value. Think about the exponential value you could probably provide if you slow down to speed up, right? And you take that time to become an industry expert. And now you have insights to deliver to executives in the cybersecurity industry. You open up the door on 2 massive deals that are highly profitable. You're not discounting them. It delivers tremendous value to the company, tremendous value to your buyer and their company. And now you've blown out the number on 2 massive deals that you really were able to think and immerse yourself into like a business owner, versus transactional, do your dials, send your emails. Like, inputs and outputs aren't sales. Like, you're not just going to magically build pipeline by dialing phone numbers. You're not. I mean, if it were that easy, everybody would be crushing, and everybody's not crushing. So there has to be a blend. I'm not saying activity is not important, because you have to do something, but I think we need to be smarter about the things that we do, and do them aligned with people's motivations. To your point, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. I think that short-term thinking is big. And personally, I'm going to kind of zoom in on one particular aspect of the external motivation that I think is mostly the blame for a lot of issues. And that is the commission structure and the high percentage of variable, right? Most sales job in the B2B world out there are like a 50-50 split based to variable, right? Some jobs out there are actually 100% variable, right? Those jobs exist too in sales. And that very much incentivizes short-term thinking. Right. If you're a rep who's worried about making a mortgage this month and it's got to make something happen by the end of the quarter, are you going to spend your week making 100 dials a day, or are you going to spend your week cleaning up your CRM, figuring out who the best leads are, getting to the point where the list you're calling is going to be clean, right? That can take quite a bit of time. And you're not going to spend 2 weeks just cleaning up the list if you got freaking numbers to hit, right? You're just going to call and hope for the best. So from the company to the sales reps, I think the high commission structure is just not helpful. Again, it's trying to pull that external lever extra hard because we think that the harder we pull that external motivation level, the better we'll get out of people. But that just isn't the lever to pull in the modern sales environment. So then the question is, well, then why do we have this, variable thing? Surely it's not because the company can't afford it, right? I've worked at companies that are sitting on $150 million in the bank. They can clearly afford to pay their reps, even if there's a slow quarter. So, and of course they pay everyone else in the company, even when it's a slow quarter. So it's not, unless you're like in a super startup-y mode, it's not really about the cash and not being able to afford to pay reps their whole amount. Someone in leadership thinks if we didn't have 50% of their income dependent on their numbers, they just wouldn't work hard. They just wouldn't try.
Right.
And that is just massively outdated thinking, right?
Yeah.
So I would argue that doesn't actually help, right? You could have the variable be a much smaller portion and still cash in on that little bit of external motivation without it being so damaging and so harming, because you look at salespeople's mental health, right? And that is terrible. And that causes a lot of people to burn out and, leave the industry, which causes the industry to be full of a lot of new people, right? Who don't have a lot of experience. And that certainly isn't good for companies, right? It causes the salespeople themselves to get pulled into this short-term thinking. And oftentimes that, leads them to give bigger discounts that they need to give or to spoil relationships because they're impatient, right? Definitely gives a worse experience to the customer for sure. Even when you look at companies looking at their churn, right? Now I'm on the post-sale side of the house.
Yeah.
And one of the elements of churn that doesn't get talked about as much, because, people, when they talk about churn, they talk about adoption, they talk about training, and they talk about usage, and they talk about product stickiness and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But one piece that I don't get to talk about is the sales rep never should have sold this to begin with. Like, there is way more accounts than I'm comfortable with that I look at it, I read the notes, I watch the recording. I'm like, dude, the sales rep should not have sold this.
Right.
They are not a good fit customer for us. And of course, we lose their business the following year and all that because, again, the sales rep was pushed into short-term thinking and financial desperation. If it's a matter of selling a gray area deal or paying your mortgage, right? I'm going to pay my mortgage and go ahead and do this gray area deal. So I don't necessarily blame the reps individually. It's the incentive structure that they're placed in. The environment they're placed in is going to naturally bring out certain behaviors in people, right? Which is impatience, which is pushiness, which is, selling when we know it's not a good fit. All that like moral gray area of like, what do you tell the customer versus what do you not tell the customer? All that comes up because of the comp structures that we're put in, where we have to do that to take care of our family, And that's just not healthy for the business, not good for the customers, not good for the sales rep. Personally, again, if I get to run a sales team, it's going to be a big percentage is base and then a small bit of variable. Because again, extra motivation has a part to play. It's just a much smaller part than it currently plays in most sales teams.
It's too bad on the fit thing because that is a huge opportunity to differentiate. And if you really trained people on the power of saying no and saying you're not a good fit, I don't think we're the right solution for you, but let me introduce you to someone else who can. Now, there is so much power in that little move. One, you build instant credibility and trust because you don't waste your time, you don't waste their time with something that you've identified as not a good fit. Right. So now that relationship has some roots that have started to sink in. Who knows where that person's going to end up in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. You might have an opportunity to engage with them again. If you treat them like that, they're going to come back and find you. Trust me. That's one. You referred them to somebody who can help them. So now you've rooted another relationship by providing a referral to someone who is a good fit for them that with power of reciprocity, that'll come back at some point, right? That's the building the pipeline for life concept. You've just created a deal. Who knows when? Trust me, there will, in that little interaction, you will have created a deal and sometime in the future. I guarantee it.
Oh yeah. Well, especially if you have a timing dependent product, right? So right now I sell a timing dependent product. There's a certain stage in a company's cybersecurity program maturation process where what we have, they start needing it like oxygen. Before that, it's a really hard sell because it's just not the most important thing right now.
Right.
After that, I guess it is also really important for them. But like until you've reached that point where they're mature enough and their program's ready enough and they have enough people that they're ready for it, It's a really hard sell. And what I see happening all the time is our sales rep pushing to make the sale now when they're not quite ready for it.
Right.
Then they buy it. Then they struggle with adoption. They struggle with implementation. They don't get a ton of value from it. Then they churn a year or two later with a bad taste in their mouth. Versus if we had just waited until they were ready, right? Yeah. Going back to that pipeline for life thing, if every other company, your competitors, is trying to hard close them and push them into a close, and you're saying, you know what, here are 3 reasons why I think it might not be the right time for you to buy us or our competitor. Do those 3 reasons resonate with you? And they're like, yeah, actually, you're right. Be like, great, I'll call you in a year. Suddenly, when you talk to them again in the year, you're the one rep who has credibility out of all your competitors who burned their credibility trying to close the deal too early. So yeah, I do think you can develop this pipeline for life. Not to mention, for individual reps who move around from company to company, you can sell to your favorite customers again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually interesting. My first B2B tech sales job, I was selling into sales teams, and there was a guy there who was leading a BDR team, and I tried to sell to him, and we went pretty far through the sales cycle, a couple of demos, and he just didn't close. Disappointing for me because I thought it'd be a great tool for him, but he didn't close. But we kept the relationship good and strong. And a few months ago, actually a few weeks ago, not even that long ago, a few weeks ago, we started talking again, but now he's interested in possibly being one of the first paid pilot companies in my business to practice lab.
That's amazing.
And it's like, whoa, I planted this seed 2 years ago. I didn't win the business. Now we're back talking again.
You just nailed it. Like, that is pipeline for life, man. Treat every interaction like it's a valuable, new rooted relationship. And whether or not you get a deal right now, I guarantee something good will come out of it at some point. Like, no
but again,
question.
It's hard to ask sales reps to do that when half of their livelihood is dependent on this deal closing, right?
So
like,
let me ask you
if
this.
you're a rep who's kicked.
I'm curious. Like, so this is a good topic. What if reps were given an option, right? And when they come in, there's 2 comp plans, right? There's the safety comp plan, which is base heavy, lower upside, right? And then there's the higher risk comp plan, which is lower base, but actually a higher upside, right? You could make more on this plan. What do you think the numbers would show? Like, what do you think people would choose?
Oh boy. I'm just going to go ahead and say 3/4 would go the base heavy plan. 1/4 would go the more aggressive, max payout plan. Right. My inclination, if I was running the business, right, is I would just, when they get hired on, say, hey, you get to decide your base to variable. The lowest base you can choose is 50%. The highest base you can choose is 90%. You choose. You know yourself. You know how well you're motivated, right, by finances. You know your tolerance for risk, right? You know yourself. Do you want 90 or 50? Obviously, the 50% plan has a lot higher upside, right? If you exceed your goals, you can make tons and tons of money.
Right.
Where, the 90% plan, you could crush your goals and only make a little more money.
Right.
So there's an upside to both, but just let them choose and maybe give them a chance once a year or something to adjust it. Because of course, people's financial situation changes as their life changes. And they may have more or less appetite for risk. As their skills improve, they may have more or less appetite for risk as their family life changes, and who knows. But I think, sales reps should just get to choose for themselves would be great. Whether you're giving them 2 choices or whether you're giving them a sliding scale to put themselves on.
It's an interesting concept.
Yes, I think
because I don't know how other, I don't want to pretend to speak for the entire sales profession, but I would always choose the higher risk option. I would always choose to bet on myself, but that's just me, right? Like, even today, I've been here 8 years. My base is maybe 1/8 of my income, maybe. You know what I mean? And I'm perfectly fine with that. Like, I'd rather have the high potential upside just because I trust myself, right? Like, I know that's what I would rather do. But I also think you can structure comp plans, because I think there's a lot of things that people struggle with in the profession. It's just the roller coaster ride, right? People maybe aren't good with money. They might hit one big one. They spend it all. Like, they just don't know how to manage that emotional roller coaster of financial instability. And that could be a hard thing to do. So you could even structure comp plans in a way that maybe base isn't that fuel for stability, but maybe the business needs more recurring revenue, right? So if you structure deals in a way with more recurring revenue over longer periods of time, maybe you could build into comp like an annuity, right? So you get paid out if it's a good fit customer, they stay longer, and you get a percentage for 5 years, 10, whatever. And then as that book starts to build up, you're building security into your financial model, and you still have the opportunity to go sell, pops that could maybe be adjustments. Who knows? I'm just, brainstorming, but there could be different ways to. I don't think it just has to be a base and it has to be a spiff or a commission or whatever. There can be different ways to structure things to make people feel better about it.
Yeah, I think the important part is that it does align with your rep, which means I do think means some level of flexibility should be introduced to comp plans. Yeah. But then I think the other piece too is that you just need to make sure that you're allowing your reps to live in the absence of fear and stress, right? Yeah. About finances, because when people are in states of stress and fear, the brain behaves differently. Okay. Right. A brain in the presence of fear does not perform as well as a brain that's relaxed, right? The brain reroutes blood away from your frontal cortex into more of the amygdala and even into your body, right? Into your larger muscle groups. And when you're in a sales negotiation, you don't need extra blood in your thighs. You need it in your frontal cortex, which means you need to be relaxed, which means you need to not have fear. And it's really hard to tell someone negotiating the terms of a big deal to not have fear when the difference between making or missing the deal is whether or not they can buy groceries this week, right? Or whether or not they can pay their mortgage or if they have to use a credit card. So you just need to structure it in such a way that people get to live in the absence of fear. Right. Yeah. That they don't have to worry about taking care of their basic needs. After that, there probably could be some benefit to incentive structures, right? So I would even say, so I'll tell you, I've spent my whole time in SMB in the mid-market space, right? People in my world are making 100K, they're making 150K a year. It's good money, but no one's here making 300K. Okay. It's possible in the enterprise sales that the high variable does make sense because if you're making 300K, for most people, your base is going to meet your most basic needs. The commission is going to go towards investments and paying down debt and savings and college for your kids. And that's the type of stuff which would allow you to operate in the absence of that fear. So maybe it's different in the enterprise world. I spent all my time in mid-market. And
I'm in the enterprise, so I guess that's part of it too. But
as well,
I do think that distinction is good though, because when it comes back to that concept of seller market fit, some people might be really well wired for the enterprise, but some people might not. And some people may be really well wired for SMB where someone else isn't. You know what I mean? So as an example, I have a buddy who's a freaking awesome sales guy, but he's really good at volume and velocity transactional sales. And he makes a killing, crushes it, just makes a ton of money. He's really good at it. He likes a full calendar, call after call after call, go. I can't do that. You know what I mean? I do enterprise deals. They're longer cycles. They're big. They take more thinking. I can't have a book calendar. Otherwise I'm never going to get the deal plan in place, all that kind of stuff. So I think you have to know where your sweet spot is too. And there should be opportunities for you if you're an SMB seller or an enterprise seller to do well.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true.
Well, listen, Jonathan, this has been an awesome discussion. Let's let the listeners know, where can they find you? Where can they find the Practice Lab? Tell us what we need to know.
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Mahan. The Practice Lab, you would want to go to thepracticelab.co. Not .com. That'll take you somewhere else entirely. Thepracticelab.co. And that's where you can learn a little bit more about our approach. As I mentioned in the beginning, right, we're very much focused on closing the gap between what people know in their heads they should be doing and what they actually have the skill set needed to pull off in a real call. So we have exercises around how to ask deeper level discovery questions, how to really get at the heart of the pain, how to ask questions that are hard to ask in a way that makes you and the prospect feel good about them rather than coming across as salesy. We have exercises around how to present your solution in a way that really gets the customer thinking, and even ways to get the customer talking more during the demo so that they're selling to you how they'd use it rather than you selling to them, right? These are all things that we've heard we should be doing, but we have specific exercises around exactly how to do it. So when you leave the week's practice, you can immediately implement it on a real sales call because you got everything you need laid out. You've already done it half a dozen times, and now you've got that practice element in place. So thepracticelab.co, you can learn about us, join our wait list. Depending on when this episode airs, we may be accepting applications, or depending on when you listen to it, it may just have to join the wait list. We do this on kind of a quarterly basis. So the next time we'll be doing a cohort is Q3 of 2022 will be the next cohort.
Very good, Jonathan. Thank you for joining the show. Go visit practicelab.co, and we will see you on the next one.